So after quite a bit of sculpting in Dynamesh, we've gotten to this point in the model. We got some really interesting detail in here. I was playing around with the standard brush and Alpha 58 to get just some surface wrinkles. I want to hold off on detailing any more because I'd like to transition into a cleaner model by using Zremesh. So with Dynamesh, we were able to do quite a bit, and the model was taken much further. I was able to pull out all of these plates without having to worry about going against the geometry. I was also able to make a few new choices. I decided that because the legs in the front had thumb-like fingers, we'd do the same in the back, and I was able to just pull that out using snake hook and sculpt those fingers in. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to duplicate the subtool, and I'm going to play with Zremesh to get the geometry a little cleaner. Now the reason why I want to do this is because I want a mesh that goes with the forms that I've now sculpted in Dynamesh. I want nice loops around the eyes, and I want something that's easier to detail. And I'm not going to have to spend that much time detailing because I'm almost done with this model, but I want to be able to have a mesh that is a little cleaner, that will enable me to pose this creature by creating subdivisions. So we're going to go into Zremesh, and then we're going to project the details back onto the new model. So let's go into Zremesh, and what I'm sensing looking at this model is that I'm going to want it to vary in density. I'm going to want the arms and legs to be very low, but I'm going to want more density in the eyes and in the mouth here. And so there's a way to do that in Zremesh that's really great, and that is by using polypaint. So let's make sure that's off. Let's go to use polypaint. We're going to be working with the standard brush. We're going to make sure that Z-add is off and that RGB is on, and also working with shift, I want to make sure that Z-add is off and RGB is on. You'll see how that'll come into play soon. So for density, I want to make sure that I'm going to be working low to high. So right off the bat, you'll notice that the character has changed color, and as I begin to paint, again make sure Z-add is off, you'll notice that only this area is in color. And so based on the intensity of the saturation, I'm going to be telling Zremesh that I want this area to be denser than the unpainted areas. As I increase the count on my slider, you'll notice that it gets denser and more saturated in color. So I want there to be a nice even transition between the increased geometry, and so I'm just gradually painting in areas where I want more density in my model. Let's just say all the head is a bit denser. I know that when I start to zoom in to this sculpt and I start to take renders of just the head and shoulders, I'm going to want to be able to get quite a bit of detail out of this, maybe even a little bit more in the chest here. Let's go a little higher. You want all of this to get a lot of geometry. Don't want to lose any resolution in here. There we go. What I'm really concerned with is the eyes, the ears, and so I'm going to increase the density even more around the eyes. So let's bring that all the way up. There we go. And let's make sure this has some nice saturation to it. And just a little bit. Now, when using Shift, you remember I did take Z-Add off, and what it will do is it'll actually soften the transition between the varying saturation here, so that'll just be a bit more even, and the lower res will just kind of flow into the higher res more evenly. You see I'm just kind of knocking back the intensity here. I just don't want to lose any detail. Good. Alright, and the rest of the body should be fine. And so let's look at Zremesh. I'm going to take this down to, let's take it down to 11, see what happens. I'm going to hit Zremesh, make sure symmetry is on. Alright, let's see what we got here. Let's get back to gray, and let's look at our frame. So that looks pretty good. Everything in the body is nice and low. I can pose this mesh fairly easily at this subdivision, and I can also adjust the sculpt very easily, and the head is really nice and dense. Now that we have our lowest subdivision, I'm going to want to divide my model and take the detail from the Dynamesh sculpt and project it onto the nice clean Z-remeshed model. So I'm going to make sure that these are the only tools that are visible. Let's turn our frame off, and I am going to divide my model. So I'm going to be jumping between project and divide quite a bit. So we're going to divide, and as I hit project all, you'll notice it's almost as if I'm shrink wrapping the new geometry over the old geometry. I'm going to hit divide. Noticing that the head is really nice and smooth with 3 subdivisions, but the rest of the body is a bit pixelated. Can't really tell here, but let's do another subdivision. So I'm going to divide, and we are at almost 3 million. That's pretty good, considering everything seems fairly smooth. And let's project. And there we go. So let's see what we have here. Alright, so everything's looking pretty good. It looks like I can do quite a bit of detail work in the head. See how smooth the dam standard is. It does seem a bit pixelated in the eyes, but when I soften it, you'll notice that I was just projecting the low resolution of the Dynamesh onto the high, and when I hit smooth, now everything's nice and clean. So I can get quite a bit of detail out of this mesh in the head, no problem. Now that I have enough resolution, I'm going to start sectioning off the model. I've already started breaking it back into polygroups so that I can get around the sculpt a little bit while I'm detailing, without having to deal with seeing everything at once. So this will help me while I'm working on figuring out the details in the head. I could even polygroup the mandibles to get around that, but I'm good. let's hit Shift F, and you can actually work with the model partially hidden and also divide it. So in case the model gets too large, the program doesn't have to worry about seeing all of the model at once, which can really help to speed things up when you're working. So I like to isolate the head, and what I'm going to do is, because I'm going to get so much detail out of this sculpt, I'm going to basically be working with the standard and damn standard brushes in order to push this a little further. We're going to be not only refining the forms, but also texture stamping the model using alphas. And alphas are great because they remind me of working with texture stamps with clay. But I'll get to that. So here I'm just going in and I'm refining my details. I'm just making sure that everything makes sense. I don't want to start painting this creature and then realize that, oh, I have no idea how an area of the creature functions. How does it articulate? So I'm really just going in and I'm starting to commit to these areas. Now you can still see areas where the lower resolution was projected onto the high, and so I'm just going to smooth that out and push my details, push my depth. So working now with the model and being able to bounce between the high and low subdivision is really beneficial when it comes to just refining the sculpt. I can adjust the eyes either at high resolution or at low. I'm hitting Shift D and I'm just going to bring it back down a bit. Sometimes it takes a little time. Shift D again. You see? And now I can move sections much more evenly and easily. So you end up with quite a bit of control. If I want this to have more of a point, to taper more evenly, I can adjust it. And this really comes into play when working with posing the creature. You want to be able to pose your creature at a very low subdivision so that you can move everything at a low subdivision, and all that wonderful detail will just follow it. Here I want to push the ear canal. A lot of people don't realize that when it comes to creatures and just real things, there's quite a bit of depth